Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be going deep into the deep, dark Peruvian Amazon forest, where our forest guide and biologist, Pat, along with his fellow guides, have experienced bizarre paranormal activity. But first, of course, if you have an effed up story on the paranormal pictures, video, we ask that you submit that to us, which you can do on our official website. And we're going to be doing a lot more of these fan submissions and featuring them in podcasts. So if that tickles your fancy, you can head on over there now. The official site is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. The menu's on the top. Click it. In the list, you'll see submissions. Click that. Fill out the form. Hit submit. And then we got it. And of course, we're going to make a much greater effort, in fact, to cover all of everybody's submissions into our podcast. And we have a lot to cover already. So anyway, if that's up your alley, be sure to submit. On another note, I do want to say to you guys, you are awesome. And I thank you very much for your support by watching our ads and basically supporting our show. So from me to you guys, my sincerest thanks. And if you continue to do this, I will promise to keep all of our podcasts free. And with that having been said, we're going to dive deep into the dark forest. So this is a submission that came from a fellow named Pat. And along with Pat's own story, he also shared some of the stories that he had heard while he was over in the Amazon. So just to give some backstory into what goes on over there, the cultural legends and stuff like that. That's where we're going to start. So the Peruvian legends that he heard while he was staying there. So he heard of these two different forest spirits. Now, if you ever heard our podcast on the fairies, you will actually notice a similarity here, as these two spirits, just like the fairy lights, they are known for drawing people into the forest. They draw you, and if you follow it, essentially you lose your way. So Pat actually noted that the biggest fear in the Amazon, believe it or not, is not getting hunted down by some wild animal. It's actually getting lost in the forest. That's their biggest fear. So anyway, of these two spirits, one is considered good and one is considered bad. And this is, again, there was a similarity here with the fairy lore as well. So the bad one is very much like the fairy light, in that it, is this fairy light that you follow. And in the Peruvian legends, it's called the Tunchi bird. Now, the Tunchi bird often appears as a light, not unlike a fairy light, and it seems to beckon you. And if you follow it, you'll eventually end up in a swamp or otherwise dangerous place. You're lost in the jungle, the biggest fear, again, of these people. And the good spirit is called a Chuyachiki, okay? And it's considered a guardian of the forest. Now, if you recall, I said that these two spirits, they work to get people lost in the forest. So you might be asking yourself, what makes a Chuyachiki a good spirit? Well, the Chuyachiki only does this to people who are doing harm to the forest. Hence why it is called, or considered a guardian of the forest. For example, people who are overhunting or hunting in forbidden places will attract the wrath of the Chuyachika or Chuyachiki. The Chuyachiki can appear as a light, just as the Tunchi bird, but it can also take the appearance of a friend or someone that you know. So if you, it will tell you, like it'll appear as a friend or something like that, and it will tell you that, it found some kind of a deer or some kind of exciting prey that, you should hunt. And seemingly this thing will be all excited and will lead you to this, great forest trophy for you to hunt. And eventually it will get enough ahead of you that, it gets out of your sight, and you will find yourself in a swampy and or dangerous part of the forest, just like what happens with the Tunchi bird, just like what happens with the fairy lights. Now, interestingly enough, there are ways to tell the difference between your shape-shifting friend and the real deal. The Chuyachiki allegedly cannot change the shape of its legs, and I found this very interesting. Its legs are said to look like either sticks or the legs of a deer. So if you run into one of your friends in the forest and he or she is beckoning you to follow, look at the legs. If they are not human, well, try not to shit your pants and don't follow it. If the Chuyachiki notices that you noticed its legs, allegedly it will try to distract you and promptly disappear. So apparently these stories, obviously people survive to tell them. They come from people who have been rescued in the forest after disappearing and after having experienced just such a thing. They would come out of the forest and find out that their friend was never in there at all. And just to draw another little parallelism, I don't know if you've ever heard this, Ryan, but there's an old story where it was like a ball, like back in the 1800s or old times anyway. There was some kind of ball, and this dashing young man shows up at the ball, and like he's extremely charismatic. He's dancing better than everybody else. He's like taking every girl. He's doing all the whirlwinds, all the fancy stuff, and everybody's really kind of taken aback by his ability. And at some point, somebody notices that he has goat legs. His legs bend backwards. And when they look at him and he knows that they know, and his eyes starts glowing red, and he smiles, and then he takes the woman, he spins into a violent whirlwind and out through the window. And apparently that was Satan, right? So I just found it interesting again that the legs were the legs were not human, just like the story here.
Kind of like stories of the satyrs in the forest, half man, half goat.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, again, like it's not fully human. There's telltale signs there, but we often overlook them. So with some insight into the legends that surround the Peruvian forests, I think it's time that we share Pat's story. So Pat's story takes place in the year 2001. And Pat is a biologist and a guide for an ecotourism company in the southeastern Peru, which is in a wild area of the Amazon. Now, Pat was staying at a lodge, and he said there was something off about this place. There's a very negative energy. And any of you who have been to a place and experienced that heavy, overbearing, negative feeling, like something bad is going to happen, will know exactly what Pat is trying to convey here. Now, for Pat, He said the whole experience started with a vivid nightmare. And in this nightmare, he was pursued through the streets by what he felt was a lion. Though in the dream, he, at this point, he hadn't seen it, but, he felt like it was a lion. To put it bluntly, he felt as if he was being hunted, stalked. He also noted that he felt an evil presence and that the animal was leering at him. And in this dream, Pat, the bulk of this dream was Pat frantically and desperately searching for a way to escape this thing that was following him. And all the while, this unseen predator seemed to keep right on his trail. And eventually, Pat climbed up onto this small roof, and of course it was a dead end. And as he sat there awaiting this creature, his ill-doomed fate, the creature slowly climbed up over the ledge at its leisure. It knew it had won and that Pat was his. So it wasn't actually a lion like Pat had, first assumed it to be. It actually, what he described it to be, was an average human male, though it seemed to have wild hair and something strange about its eyes. He actually put a lot of emphasis on the eyes. He said there was something wrong with the eyes. So despite having a human form, Pat said it was very much like a monster to him. It really had an otherworldly essence about it. And as the creature climbed onto the top of the roof, it calmly folded its arms, boldly leaned and looked toward Pat and said, and I quote, "I just wanted you to know that I can come and get you whenever I want." So, this is a very ominous and threatening, I guess, way to put it. And that's the way Pat took it when he heard it. And he said he felt the fight or flight reflex, so much so that it woke him up out of his nightmare, and it was weighing heavily on his mind. It really stuck with him. And during this same day, Pat had, he kept a nightmare to himself. I mean, he was there. There was other guys. There was other people there in the lodge with him. But he kept this to himself, thinking that, if he mentioned it, people would think he was crazy. Until at one point, another guide had awoken. She was taking a nap, and she awoke shaking, and she proclaimed that, she had the most terrible nightmare. And in it, she was studying a type of wild pig called a peccary. And in this dream, what she also noted was unusually vivid. She was attacked by a group of peccaries, so a group of wild pigs, and she was eaten alive. And after she said this, one of the head guides actually piped up and said, "Oh, you're, or what was it said? Oh yes, dreams of persecution. We all have those. It's strange, but who knows why." And after he said that, all these guides kind of jumped in on the conversation and started to tell their own experiences with these vivid nightmares. And they all experienced these unusually vivid nightmares while sleeping there. And none of it really had anything to do with, things that they were partaking in the run of their day, or things they were watching or involved in. They really seemed to come out of left field. And the people who had been there longer and who have, experienced this several times, to them it was a normal thing, something that everybody already knew and accepted. And shortly after this had taken place, another guide, and this was a good friend of Pat, he had a bizarre experience that really changed his entire demeanor for the rest of that day. Pat had explained that, he had described this friend as a fearless, outgoing guy that had a great sense of humor, but on this particular morning, he was very out of sorts. He appeared as if he hadn't slept. He was out of character. He was visibly shaken in a way that Pat had never seen him. And apparently, what this friend had, what had happened, he went to sleep alone in the guide room, I guess, where most of the guides sleep. But he apparently never got much sleep because he was constantly having these nightmares that would wake him up, and it was a recurring nightmare. The nightmare being that his friend had, his best friend had turned evil and was taunting him and saying these terrible things that he said she would never say in real life. But this is where things get really weird. It's one thing to have nightmares. It's one thing for a group of people to have nightmares, but when things start happening in the physical reality, it's another matter entirely. And that is what happened here. So the friend said that the bed started shaking. And, this would ramp up, and it got more violent, and to the point where, he started screaming for it to stop. And after this whole thing happened, he started hearing voices and evil laughter. So, I'm not sure exactly how long Pat stayed at the lodge, but he said as long as he did stay there, he had this illogical fear of going to the bathroom. And don't assume that is because the reason for this is because not because he was going to be hunted by some wild animal or someone's going to be playing peekaboo with him, but because he said he had the feeling that someone or something, while he was in there, would be glaring at him with evil intent.
So
he
now
described
these bathrooms were like semi exposed to the outside. I would guess like some kind of an outhouse setup. I think that's how they described it.
That's right. So I can see where the vulnerability would come from there. But Pat said the longer that he stayed at this lodge, the stronger that feeling of being watched became. And I don't think it was exclusive to the bathroom, but it was aspirated there just by the fact that the bathroom, it was not connected to, the lodge. You had to go outside. So we're speaking about people having to do that in, this forest, in the middle of nowhere. Personally, I could already imagine being afraid of like wild animals and stuff like that, but that's not what freaked him out. And what gets interesting here is that someone actually had an encounter that kind of, coincides with the feeling that Pat was having. So, this feeling just grew and grew and grew the longer that Pat was there, and to the point where he almost expected to run into something terrible. It was just a matter of time, right? So he was speaking to a fellow guide about this at one point, and this guide shared his own story. And apparently, this guide had tried to go to the bathroom. He opened the stall door, and it must have been one of those ones that you push forward, and it turned, like the door goes inwards, right? So he starts pushing in the door, walking in while he's opening it. And obviously he can't see behind the door. He's still pushing it open. And he banged into somebody. And without pushing further or wanting to look back, or without looking to see who it is, obviously he didn't want to feel like a pervert, he excused himself, turned around and walked out, just to wait outside until he could get his turn. And he said he waited a while out there, but nobody ever came out. So, still needing to have to use the bathroom, he called out to see if there was anybody there. He didn't get an answer. And so, he looks inside, the last thing he could do really, he looks inside and it's empty. And Pat, so that's kind of what Pat was afraid of happening to himself. But Pat said, he never heard of any of the guests having experiences like this. None of it. The dreams, the being watched, the banging into stuff, the beds going crazy and shaking and stuff like that, and hearing voices. Nobody heard that except the guides. But among the guides, it was actually a pretty common occurrence. So, Pat had actually went out and he asked some of the locals there, if anything bad had ever happened in the area, trying to get some insight into what he was experiencing. And, they didn't have a lot to say, but they did say that in the past, there was lots of battles and massacres between the local natives and rubber tappers. So could this be ghosts of, those who died in battle? Perhaps something created out of rituals done by the locals. Pat doesn't know for sure. I don't know for sure, but he did note that the experience, and this is interesting. He said he noted the experience felt like to him like it was a violation of his very personal space. And that's not something you normally feel from a nightmare or even like poltergeist activity, really. I don't really ever hear anybody say I felt like it was a violation of my personal space. But in Pat's case, that's what he felt like, and I guess because even in his dream, it's almost like this whatever this thing was had followed him and hunted him and made a point to tell him that it could come and get him whenever it wanted. And I think to him it felt like more than a dream, like it was something related to the experience that he was actually having at this lodge. And that can be reinforced by the idea that the other guides had experiences. They've all experienced the nightmares, and some of them have experienced literally poltergeist-like activity and hearing voices and stuff like that. So that's a really strange tale there. And Pat did note that after he left that lodge, he went to stay at another one that was still in the middle of the rainforest. It was still without roads, but he didn't experience this feeling of oppression. He didn't have nightmares. He didn't feel like he was being watched. It would appear that this collection of nightmares and paranormal activity and voyeuristic ghosts were exclusive to that first lodge that Pat stayed in.
Well, it's interesting. The Peruvian Amazon is, even to this day, is a hotbed of shamanistic tradition and activity. So the idea that perhaps there was a spirit or a ritual performed, is not outside of the realm of possibility at all. To this day, there's very strong shamanistic traditions that continue. I mean, a lot of people may have heard of ayahuasca, and that's the area that the indigenous peoples have produced this mind-altering brew out of vines and leaves and whatnot. So right up to right now, there are very strong shamanistic traditions in that area.
Well, what I found interesting, and within regards to, as you said, the rituals and stuff like that, I'm sure, like, it feels so familiar, it's on the tip of my tongue, that the whole idea where you have a group of people experiencing nightmares, I'm sure I read it to do with, like, cursed objects. It might have even been Jason Haxton's Dybbuk box. And I think that, again, is something that is common amongst a group of stories I've read on cursed objects, where when you're in the proximity of it, you have these terrible nightmares that, they're more than just, a typical nightmare. They almost seem personal, like they're communicating something to you, whether that's a threat or a warning. That's the kind of thing that they experience. And so when we have a whole lodge that happens to, one has to wonder if there's something there that's cursed. Now, when we talk about rituals with these objects, cursed objects, is often the case that there is a ritual performed to curse that object. In fact, it's for some cultures, that is a type of weapon, especially certain natives. They have certain objects that they'll place a curse on that belongs to somebody. In fact, voodoo dolls is similar in that sense. They'll take people's hair or some skin, something that imbues that person into this doll so that they can bind them. So I wonder if this lodge, perhaps the area, perhaps the land.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that maybe in this instance, it's not even just a an individual object or artifact or relic or something like that, as much as, perhaps the area itself. And, there's like the parallels that you drew earlier between some of the guardian spirits, the good and bad guardian spirits, and the fairies. Again, we have this region that this area is almost like the fairy circles, or the homes of the fairies, which were usually out of the way locations, and you don't get much more out of the way than the Peruvian Amazonian jungle. That's as out of the way as you can get, pretty much. So perhaps it just so happened that they built this lodge, in an area that was already inhabited by something unseen.
That's a good point. So that is our story from Pat on the Peruvian jungle nightmares. Of course, if any of you guys have your own paranormal stories, effed up stories, or pictures or video, we would certainly like to have it. I can definitely get it on the website, and we do plan on putting all of these into their own podcasts. Obviously, it's going to take some time, and we got a lot of backlog there, but send them in, and we will do our best to get them out there. So if that's something of interest to you, you can visit our official website at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com, and I will get them up as fast as I can. Also, another thing to note for you guys, I did have the comments I tried to disable all the comments, and it only affected the new videos. So it was still going on the old videos. I was too lazy to go and individually cancel them out for every video. So I've gotten good at ignoring comments. So essentially what I'm going to do, I'm going to re-enable comments on this video. I'm still not really paying attention to them, but you guys can mingle. And if you do have anything that you really want to let us know, aside from submitting a story or something like that, you can certainly contact us on the official website just by clicking on the contact link in the menu. So with that having been said, guys, thanks again for listening, and we're hoping to have a lot more of these stories coming your way. And with that said, this is Will saying I will catch you next time.
Have a good night, everybody.